would like to call to order the public hearing on the adoption of the proposed comprehensive plan.
Sorry.
So those of you standing up, looking ahead, comprehensive plan for 2019 for the village of Riverwoods. Can I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Chamberlain. Here. Trustee Clayton.
Here.
Trustee Goldstein. Trustee Haber.
Here.
Trustee Hollander.
Here.
Trustee Jamerson.
Here.
President Norris.
Here. As you all know, it's time to renew the comprehensive plan. The Plan Commission has worked on getting that updated. We now have a proposed copy. Part of the process is that we have to have a public hearing. With that, let me turn it over to the council.
I get the whole time.
3 times. That's why it was here. I'll work on mine. I got it the third time. I know. So
I have nothing to do with it.
right for me.
Okay.
3 times, I'm telling you.
All right. I have nothing to say.
We take the fifth.
The purpose of the hearing is to give members of the public a chance to offer their thoughts on the comprehensive plan draft, on what it suggests. So I know it's hard to do that unless you either looked at a copy of the plan, which has been available for some time. We can summarize some of the main elements of the plan, but I think, well, for the public record, I guess I will say that the plan draws on our vast history of plans. It begins by describing the nature of the village of Riverwoods, what makes it special, different. One of the things we tried to do, I think most of the board members know this, we tried to look at some of the research about what village residents want in the future to guide the plan by looking at the strategic survey that was done in 2015. And in fact, there is a statement, a Riverwoods vision statement about what the community is, that was taken almost word for word from the 2015 survey. We were told at the time, I think most of the members here were present when that was done, that the survey was very successful in terms of reaching a large number of residents, statistically speaking. I don't remember what the exact return rate was, but that it was probably the most serious and sustained effort that the village ever had in time trying to, I think it was higher than that, it was 28% or something.
Crazy.
And we actually, for this draft of the comprehensive plan, listed it as an appendix to the plan, and it's there's a link to it, we hope, so that people, it's probably 60 or 70 pages long. There were also, many communities when they adopt comprehensive plans have a number of community meetings. We also engaged with the branding firm. They did meetings with village residents, collected comments, and they presented a report to the village board that talked about the values of the community, what our residents want. And then finally, there were meetings that we had coincidentally while the Planning Commission was considering the comprehensive plan. There were meetings about the campus plan, and we had residents and town hall meetings trying to gather information, solicit opinions, and then we did the, what was it called? I'm going to use the wrong word, the survey that we sent out through the internet.
Oh, my sidewalk, or what was the other word for it?
Yeah, I can't remember, but we also engaged with residents about the campus plan. So we had 3 different sustained efforts of trying to get community input about what the village residents are looking for, what they wanted, to help inform what some of the goals should be of the comprehensive plan. And that's reflected in the revised draft. In order to give effect to those values, when we looked at the actual land use categories, one of the most important things the comprehensive plan does is to enunciate what the land use categories should be in the village, the major land use categories. And we looked at the residential category and named it the single-family residential category, and explained in greater detail, I think, than we ever have before, that the single-family nature of the community in many ways is integral to preserving the woodland character. And I think we tied those, I think the Plan Commission attempted to tie those concepts together better than we've done in previous versions of the plan. Oh, the name of the digital outreach survey was Engage Riverwoods. We also, another departure from earlier plans, one of the land use categories we introduced was mixed use overlay. And the concept there was that we have categories that encompass almost all of the areas of the village already, but we wanted to add as an option the ability to consider mixed use, particularly within the B1 and the B2 districts, thinking that along the periphery, along the walking, where we know we have interest in mixed use residential, that we would find a way to consider adding that kind of use within those areas. Many of the other topics were the same topics as in previous plans, but we revised the text and updated to talk about the current situation, for example, with the widening of Deerfield Road. So that's really, I think, if you had to digest the basic tenets of the plan, is to engage with residents, promote community, and continue to advance the protection of our environment in various ways that the residents enjoy.
Now I get to play with mine.
Here, you can use mine if you like, it works.
Mine's working now. The mere threat of having to use yours is enough to scare. Are there any comments from board members? I realize that you haven't had it for a long time, and I do have. Now yours isn't working. So, although we talked about voting tonight, since we received one set of comments on it just this afternoon, I think we won't continue the public hearing necessarily, but I don't expect to take action tonight, even though it is on the agenda. So are there comments from the board? Sure.
I have 7 comments. Do you want me to make them now, or do you want me to send them to Bruce?
Are they something that you think would help the public think about it, or do you want to bring it up?
A couple might be, I'll talk about the ones that are more policy related. First of all, I think the Plan Commission did a great job. This is a really good document. So my comments are minor. Okay, I'm just on my screen center.
Guess which bill is not going to get paid this month?
On page 2, paragraph 3, there's a phrase in something about it's many instances where we don't use user pay. I think that what we should do instead of saying there are many instances, I think it's important to explain the thinking, which is essentially there, as to why we might diverge from user pay. So, for example, it might say the village has chosen not to use this user pay philosophy in some instances where there are municipal-wide services, or, and I don't know if we have other examples, but I think we should specify the policy reasons for when we diverge from the user pay system. I think right now we have a statement about reducing invasives that is in the residential character, but I think we also need that statement in the ecology section. I think that...
Cheryl,
yes.
if you asked the question, and now that I hear where where you're going. Those
Yes.
will be, I think, more specific than I think we want.
Okay, yeah, mine are all very specific,
Okay.
although most of them have to do with the why of doing particular things, so it may require some discussion, perhaps not.
I think, and I'm trying to make this work because I realize that this doesn't work out. Looks like Cheryl may be the only speaker tonight.
Okay, we can all go
I'm
home.
not saying that those shouldn't be discussed, I just think those are more of the board discussion.
It is, it is. Those were actually the only two things that I think really relate to comments that may come from the public. The other ones are really board policy type things.
Anyone else, Henry, did you? Mike?
So I know that you know, because I sent it to you, I circulated a red line of the document, the most recent draft that I received earlier this week. My suggestion would be that, you know, that my copy be circulated, and also at least I'll know what my comments are. And that any other comments that other trustees have, I'd like to see those comments as well, because I'm concerned about this sending things out to everybody. It's on the agenda. So that's why I just didn't send it to everyone. I only sent it to Bruce and sent it to the mayor. But I think it would be good if we could all get everyone's comments to the document. I used the red line. I got a copy of the Word document and red line my comments into the document. And I think that's a very efficient way of doing it. We can all share those documents.
I contemplated sending yours out, I received it late enough that nobody would have had time to look at it, so I wanted to make sure it got out.
Yeah, if we do that, I prefer to see it as a compilation of everyone, or perhaps,
Yes, send them to me or Bruce,
Okay.
and then we'll send it out to everybody as diversions, and it will be published otherwise, because for the Open Meetings Act, I think we need to be careful doing that, but that at least then we'll be setting the agenda. Henry?
Do we need to have another public meeting then with final documents?
I don't think so.
I mean, if we believe it's a significant enough change that it would be appropriate, then yes, we would have a second public hearing. But if it's more wordsmithing and fine tuning, then if the thrust of the document hasn't changed, I don't believe we need another public hearing. But again, if the board wants it, we'll do it, so.
You know, I also sent the document, so that the record is clear. I also sent the document to Mr. Needleman, because I figured he was the author ostensibly, so that he should receive my comments. I don't know whether he's going to want to input again, or whether he's just deferring to us, but just so the record's clear.
Okay, with that, let me ask, is there any comment from the public? Yes?
Yeah, my name is Ross Romanelli, and I may be speaking from a great deal of ignorance of the plan here. I just took a quick 5-minute perusal of the copy that was given to me. And between the beautiful photograph that's on the first or second page and the paragraph or two of the vision of Riverwoods or the character of Riverwoods, one would never know that there was a community like Thorngate in Riverwoods. And I think that's terrible. That we're not worthy of one sentence in that book to describe that there's something else other than 1 and 2 acre lots. I think that's something that should be looked at. Thank you.
I can say that amongst the comments I've seen, that is something that someone has already commented about as well. So you are not alone. Are there any other comments from the public? Hearing none, then I need a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
Or we can continue it if you think that
Yeah, if
that's
you-
what we should do, because then we can,
okay,
That's true too. Would you prefer to continue it just to be sure?
yes.
sure. Yeah, in case anyone
I
else wants to
certainly will
comment.
entertain a motion to continue, so we don't have to worry about those.
So-
To the second, to the first Tuesday in
Third.
September, or the third Tuesday.
It's the third of September, I believe, is the next meeting date.
Does that leave enough time for everyone, or you want to do it to the third Tuesday? Then we have time to get the comments and.
Third Tuesday is second time.
I don't want to continue it more than to the third Tuesday in September. I think it needs to be addressed.
You may want to give the plan commission a chance to respond to comments we have. I'm not sure they're going to have met or be able to communicate among themselves. I don't know how significant our comments are going to be, but they're the ones in the document. I think they should at least have the opportunity to weigh in. Or maybe David's added sufficient, I don't know.
I would imagine, again, I think it's unlikely that it will be that significant, but certainly we will make sure that the plan commission receives the feedback. And if they wish to do it, then we can always continue the next date if we have to.
I think rather than thinking of sending this back for their comment, that they would have the opportunity as individual commissioners to comment at the hearing or at the board meeting on the changes that are being made and why we did things rather than, I mean, the process has to move forward at some point. They've worked on this for a year and a half.
I mean, I would have to want a major rewrite before I'd send it back to them. And I don't think anybody is necessarily calling for that. So, having their feedback and comment or responses to questions from the board, I think is a more appropriate way and more expeditious way. So there's been a motion to continue it. Do I have a date for that?
The 3rd of September.
The 3rd of September? That was the motion, the second agrees? That's what I believe it is. So all those in favor of adjourning the public hearing and continuing it to the next hearing date of September 3rd, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned and continue to September 3rd. I would now like to call to order the, exciting here. The Board of Trustees meeting for August 20th, 2019. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain? Here. Trustee Clayton?
Here.
Trustee Goldstein? Trustee Haber?
Here.
Trustee Hollander?
Here.
Trustee Jamerson?
Here.
President Norris?
Here. All right, first item of business is approval of minutes from the board meeting of July 16th, 2019. That is the last meeting that was held as the meeting for the first Tuesday in August was canceled for lack of an agenda. Are there any additions or, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Do I have any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Village ecologist report is not here. Treasurer's report.
Okay, overall fund balance was decreased by $43,000 between the June and July reports. Most of that occurred in the general fund. The other funds kind of balance themselves out net on that tape. As far as the investment mix, there is a unique situation that occurred last week with the inversion of the yield curve, where it triggered that 800 going down, if anybody did follow it. But it affects our rates as maturities come on board. Fortunately, we're short term, so we're more in the 2-year range or less, and the
the rates have held pretty steady, and as a matter of fact, I just was looking through some old correspondence between myself and Danielle. They kind of foresaw this a few months ago, and as of right now, they're expecting a quarter point easing by the feds the next meeting. And we do have a significant number of maturities coming through in the next 90 days, but I don't expect a huge decrease in our overall rate that we're earning on this. As of right now, the portfolio itself is yielding about a 2.5 return to us. There was a window, and I can't remember the exact number of maturities we had, where we were actually getting 3% on quite a few of the maturities. That's now down. And we're looking at the, as of right now, I think there's about $94,000 that just matured this week. And Danielle is going to give me different looks, but it appears that as though right now the corporates are going to be the best yield. Treasuries are about 1.75, we can get a corporate for 2.3 is what we're hoping to still get. That was our last renewal at that level too. But we're very careful of the mix, and as of right now, we only have 13% in that range. Everything else is spread throughout the portfolio mix that we're allowed as a village. In fact, that was the last maturity when we had a group of securities come through. We renewed in a Morgan Stanley corporate at 2.31. And I don't know who will be available now, but they know our quality assurance and what standards we would need in those corporates, so we're not going to dip into a B or something rated lower just for a higher yield. Hey, we've been in the zero yields before, so 2.3 is a home run right in these days. That's really it for the flavor of everything where we're at right now. Any questions?
Well, now Cheryl's trying to yell loud, Chloe.
First of all, thanks for being here, and your son is welcome anytime.
Say that again?
I said thanks for being here, and your son is welcome anytime.
Well, thank you.
I think my questions are actually for Bob. I have some questions about why certain things are down and why we're showing losses. Are those questions really for Bob?
Losses on the investments?
No, in certain categories on
On the profit and loss statements?
The revenue expenses statement.
Yeah, I think from that standpoint, I'll be glad to run it by him, but I don't have the detail on those answers.
Okay, you know what, I'll just send my questions to Bob then.
Copy me though, just so I can hear the response as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheryl, they're not necessarily losses, it's sometimes variance to budget, or the revenues haven't been up.
Right,
The
I just
revenues are-
meant what it shows a negative, let's put it that way.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, engineers report?
Wait,
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
I was going to comment on the revenue and expense report. Maybe we can do that now or at the, okay.
Go ahead.
Can you get the revenue and expense report up on the screen? A couple things I want to call your attention to. First of all, if you look at the very bottom of the report where it talks about the sewer fund,
yeah,
and you can see that there's a $298,000 positive against the budget. The issue there is simply one of timing. We've got a $100,000 lift station project that we're going to undertake before the end of the year. So that will come more into line as the year goes forward. The next thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is if you look up in the general fund under column 2 and column 6, where we're comparing the actual year-to-date to the prior year-to-date, you can see that this year our net loss, if you will, of $99,000 is down from almost $662,000 from last year, year-to-date, at this particular point in time. That's due to both a combination of decreased revenues and increased expenditures.
It's clear that while the majority of the decline in revenue is due to the reduction in sales tax receipts, it's worth noting that revenue is down in every category. Expenditures are up only in administration. That's $812,000 versus $674, and that difference of $137 roughly primarily seems to be the result of one-time costs versus recurring costs. So we may be able to bring those expenditures back into line in the coming year, but I'm still kind of reviewing that part. But I think the important thing here is that these results really indicate that during the 2020 budgeting process, we paid particular attention to the updated revenue forecast for the coming year and establish some specific targets for new revenue going forward in order to guide our expenditure plan. In the absence of kind of a revenue base, it's going to be hard to be able to go through and detail out where we think expenditures ought to go. And if there's any other questions on the statement, you can either direct it to Bob or direct it to me.
Any questions? Okay, engineer, you said you will be our leader.
Correct.
Well, you guys got the working microphones. This is really fixed.
You gotta keep it to a minimum.
Okay, Director of Community Services report, that's Rob Neesworth. Oh, CBA did not meet, Plan Commission? Let's see how this will work.
Here, this one's working at the moment. Try that.
The Plan Commission, is this working? I guess so. The Plan Commission had the recommendation to the board to authorize one cannabis dispensary in the business districts and not to authorize a business to be able to allow consumption of cannabis on site. So the reasoning essentially was that we have really one business district where the sale of cannabis would be appropriate. And there was discussion about how many dispensaries are needed, and given the size of our retail district, they thought starting out with one for right now, and later expanding to two if we ever got there, would be all right. And the board should look at enacting taxes and revenue measures to make sure that we collect as much as we can from having authorized a dispensary in the village. The other thing, the board did direct, and we got a little derailed by consideration of the car wash. I think there have been some new submittals with the proposed car wash at 777 Saunders Road. And I think now with engineering review much closer to recommending approval, we think we'll,
You talked to the,
with engineering approval now ready to line up behind the project in terms of being the required standards. They're coming, the applicant's coming back to the Plan Commission in September, and it's entirely possible that by this time, this would be the clear appearance, I think. The Plan Commission would be ready to have a vote on whether it recommends that use. At that point, I explained to the petitioner what we need to do is then, now, now that once we have a plan that the Plan Commission has recommended approval of, we then go back to the village of Deerfield. We have an intergovernmental agreement with Deerfield, so I just remind everyone on the board that we told Deerfield that we would show them the final approved plan, and then we would then amend the intergovernmental agreement with Deerfield before the board was in trouble with approving it with an ordinance. The third thing I'll mention is the board did direct the Plan Commission to consider the question of some language for group homes and analyzing our language on family size. That's what's really been derailed through all these other things happening with the comprehensive plan and special uses. But
We do think that the plan commission will take this up in the next couple of meetings.
This one has been working.
Police report. Take it from each of us. Maybe this is a black hole here, because now it's not working.
It was working before.
Also, we're going to set it at 6 or 7 times.
That bunch of trees.
Yeah.
That's
It's
a red light flashing on the back.
I think you can hear a lot of curves.
So, the police activity for this meeting is in your packets, as well as the report that I prepared for the last meeting and it was canceled. I'm good. If I want to, right? See.
Yes.
That's what we can see.
So you actually have 2 reports in the packet. So you actually have
Report by.
A little bit, but that's okay. Laugh, it's on. It was on. You should have touched it.
Is that?
That's good enough.
It's not doing anything.
Just talk loud.
How about that?
Any louder.
Sure.
Yes.
Like, That's all.
I have a question.
I just wanted to let the board know that I think I did mention earlier, a little more detail. We are going through the process of becoming accredited by the Illinois Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. It's a voluntary process to become accredited through IE. Currently, there are, I believe, 36 agencies in Illinois that are accredited. I'm familiar with the process. I was the accreditation manager when I was in Hamilton Park, and I brought a lot of our standards and policies with us. And so basically, accreditation is the ongoing process where our agencies evaluate policy and procedure against established criteria and have compliance with those criteria verified by an independent authoritative body, in this case, the Illinois Law Enforcement Accreditation Council. We did have a mock assessment on July 29th. We had 3 outside officers from nearby agencies who are involved with accreditation, and they reviewed our policies and procedures and determined that we are ready for a formal assessment to become accredited, and we are in the process of scheduling a date later this year. And that's all I have.
And naturally, it's at that point that the microphone in front of me, which was on, has now gone off. Henry?
You're working microphone. Does the doubling of the premise exam have any significance?
You know, I don't know if this is working anymore either. I was looking at that myself. So there's 2 reasons we would do a premise exam. And one of them is if you notice an open garage door or an open door, or you get a call from somebody that the neighbor's door is open, we'll do a premise exam. But most of them, the vast majority of them, are people who are gone on vacation. So it's a vacation watch. That's what our premise exams are. And then at the end of the house watch, or we can premise it, when the people come back, then we give them a notice, just telling them the house was fine while they were gone. And those numbers have gone up, so I don't know if more people are reporting it to us. That's probably what it basically is, that they're going out of town. And that's probably why they're going. We're just getting more people who are letting us know that they're going.
I'm just wondering, the same kind of question about the DUIs, that the DUIs have more than doubled year to date.
Well, I've got 2 officers who I think the mayor was going to mention, and that's Sergeant Fitzwater and Officer Bill Kirby, who have always led the
department in DUIs by far. You know, that's common among many agencies that we have a couple of officers or a small percentage of officers that do a lot of DUIs and is very good at it. And they just made, the two of them made a lot more arrests this year than they did last year. They made a lot of arrests last year. So, and I think the mayor was going to talk further about that.
Are there any other questions for the chief? All right, hearing none, village attorney's report.
Everything is on the agenda.
Okay, I feel like a reporter here with that one. Information items and comments from the president. As noted, let me get down to that part of the sheet here. Sergeant Fitzenritter and Officer Kirby have both been awarded certificates of appreciation from the Alliance Against Intoxicated Motorists in their efforts to ticket DUIs. I know the last time when we had an award ceremony for them here, they had the highest percentage versus number of people, et cetera, of anybody on the North Shore. And I think all it was, no, it was just these two officers again, that they actually got the award.
I believe you're talking about two different things. The award that they received with some other officers were, they reached milestones where they had 100.
We had that, but I think they came in.
There was a report that was done in it came out in one of the papers.
You're right.
Talking about how many DUIs, Riverwood's arrested and all the other
You're
towns in
right.
the area. And we were among the highest.
Mixing my ceremonies, but the two officers have been recognized in the past for their efforts to eliminate DUIs, and I think we all appreciate that, because we know that at least half of all fatal accidents on the road involved intoxicated drivers. As Trustee Haber noted earlier, I have a note about the Open Meetings Act and emails between trustees. Please remember that emails can't constitute a public meeting, so do try to avoid copying everybody back. As we noted, I may send them out, or 2 weeks ago, Trustee Haber, as the acting president, did on the scheduling, which is fine, but if it's a matter that's a public issue, that should always come back to the president. Don't send copies to everybody. We may have a meeting on that. I've got a book I can send around that we got from the Attorney General's office to help address that. But if in doubt, don't
Is there
copy.
a question from Bruce? Is there a way to, on an email that you send, let's say I want to send an email to all the board, is there a way to then maybe copy a public email, a Village of Riverwood's public email, which would then initiate the prohibition? Or would that still be a problem? You understand what I'm saying? Actually publish it to the public.
I think the Winmore is on, and the reason is because the public would know that the communication is going on, but wouldn't have the opportunity to participate or observe it. It's happening. I mean, the Open Meetings Act is talking about the public having an opportunity to be present while it's happening. It really hasn't caught up with the digital age entirely. The best way I've heard of explaining the prohibition about these email exchanges, occasionally someone sends an email exchange to one trustee or two trustees and one trustee who sent it. That's three. That's a majority of a quorum. And the idea is that a series, even just a series of emails that are pushed around, if they end up becoming a conversation, if they're tantamount to a conversation, are a meeting. So if we all published an email to the public and then other people commented to that, we could in effect be constituting a meeting even though we're not in the same place. So the safest thing to do is to send emails to the mayor or someone on staff, me. We can collate comments, we can communicate back to everyone, and then the board members can actually discuss it in an open meeting. I think that's still the best. I'm really sorry to do this, but I do need to go back to the village attorney. So I'll say I wouldn't normally do that. And that would be appropriate on our corner lot. Again, that's a 1.7 acre corner lot. We have received a letter of intent from a potential buyer, and that potential buyer suggested that its letter of intent is essentially count towards its response to the proposal. That's what the proposal was. Because the property is in a TIF district, the state law requires that we seek out alternate proposals because the village owns the property, we'll be considering conveying it to someone. So we published the request for proposal, and in the interval of time, while it was published before night, another broker called up the village. They referred the broker to our published RFP, and that broker then had a client that was very interested in making a proposal as well. So they did submit a proposal to the village offering to purchase the village corner lot. Now, what I would like from the board is whether you want to offer people to make proposals. If so, which one? We would then say negotiating further with you, and we would try and negotiate a further proposal. If forwarded to you, if the board felt that it was clear enough that it wanted to engage with one of the offerers instead of the other, we can take it up in an open session. If the board feels like it needs to discuss whether one offer price is offset by some factors or whether they want to counter or do something different, then respond to it. Then I would suggest we go into closed session to discuss the two offers. So once we start talking about it in public, the prices that they offer will be public. But if the decision is fairly clear that you want to engage with one of the two, we can do it now. So I'm sort of looking at you, trying to decide if you feel the need to go into closed session. If so, we'll go into closed session.
Fairly clear to me. That's pretty clear.
Some components on one of the bids that I think is worth discussing. I think you're better off doing it in closed session.
Obviously, that's the safest way of going, we can always go back to the public session, so I would prefer to.
Okay. Why don't we go into closed session for considering that component, if it affects whether to accept the offer or not, the price, whether the price is
The price being appropriate, I think it's worth discussing. And can you do it at the end of this meeting
Well,
so not everybody has to leave and then come back?
The purpose of going into closed session is not to discuss whether it's appropriate to sell property. It's whether it's about price. That's the purpose of closed session is narrowly focused. Is
It would also.
Well, but price and terms, yes.
Yes.
in terms, that's what I'm
I
asking.
heard you say
Well,
terms.
then it's terms.
So and whether you would want to modify something, you're just not saying yes or no.
Because
I'm okay with not going into closed session.
Well,
I think it's fairly
Well,
what the, that's the problem.
yeah, and all I'm trying to do is the record clear enough to do it, because obviously I'd rather not, as Trustee Haber said, we don't want to discuss something that would be negotiated. If we're talking about, we could either modify the price or the conditions we would be willing to sell.
I don't think there's any harm going into closed session. I think there's a harm not going into closed session. I just don't want to,
all right, I'll tell
if
you
we
what.
do it at the end, rather than everybody go out and do it.
We'll go into closed session to discuss which of the two offers we want to accept. And during closed session, as it develops, if it becomes something that's not a subject matter for closed session, we'll adjourn and come back to open session.
Okay.
But we'll do that later.
We'll do that.
We'll do that in the future.
Sorry.
And then I have a question about emails. Am I correct in assuming that any two trustees can have a conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
It's when it's three trustees or the trustees and the mayor who counts toward a quorum and can vote.
Yes, I understand the third one is the,
Well,
Yeah, if two can't talk, then nobody's talking to anybody.
so, again, if two go in a room and talk, and then one member goes in with another person talks in another room in sequence.
Yeah, talk about emails.
Sue by email.
But you should also know that those emails are.
Oh, yes. Right, well, they're discoverable, aren't they?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
They're fully our public communications.
But for instance, they didn't send out an email to tell us we were supposed to wear white and blue striped shirts. So,
That's just the lawyer's code. Mike missed the memo.
I guess I missed it too.
I had a question, I had a comment, email comment. Emails in general that contain an opinion where you can't reply because you can't reply all are not a issue of the open meeting act. Email questions in general are frustrating because it's whoever has the computer and has the most time to reply and has the the best opportunity wins. So email discussions in general, I find.
Okay. They need the microphone working for a few seconds to move on to the news that Jack running our various community activities has finally succumbed to having a new job that requires too much of her time to allow her to continue to devote as much as we've gotten for her from free. So we need someone now to help us get planned on the Halloween party, Easter egg hunt, etc. We will be reviewing, because I know we talked about whether we should have a part-time person doing some of these things. But certainly right now, I would prefer to have a community volunteer as we have in the past for a number of reasons, including just community spirit and involvement. But be aware, so if you have any suggestions from people you could volunteer.
And the volunteer could volunteer for jobs, one and everything.
That's true. We'll take any volunteer, because the one thing I would ask for is a little more time, although Jackie did give us a great folder and instruction package, so we're not in a total lurch, but certainly it's not going to be that easy to replace. Thursday night, Congress will be holding a Congress on the Corner meeting here in the village hall. About any issues, I got a phone call this afternoon. I got my robocall this afternoon telling me about it. So certainly it would be good if you can attend. I will tell you, I have a meeting that night, so I will welcome Congressman introducing and then turn it over to Trustee Clayton to at least lock the building up behind. They're expecting somewhere in the range of 60, 70 people. I certainly would encourage any of you to attend. I think it's good for us as a village, obviously, and I think it's a good civic activity to have our local representative from Washington here. It's a busy social week. Friday, there are 2 events that are also on the agenda. The first is Heroes Night, which is being held in Lincolnshire from 4:30 to 7 to recognize 4. Oh, I'm sorry, 4. You're right, 4 to 7. So I picked up the wrong time. I picked it up on something else. Because you can see there's a second event after that where I'm bouncing around. Certainly, I plan to attend, and I would encourage all of you to attend the Heroes Night. We want to recognize our local first responders, and particularly our police force. This event, it's a different name. I don't remember, Bruce, what the other, it's Community Night Out or something like that. National Night Out. Other communities have done to recognize first responders, but Several local communities have instead decided to focus more on our first responders, and I think it is a good thing. Second, as you can see, I think a good time will be had by all if you go, especially if you got some kids, because they're going to have the police dog, ground gym, laser tag, and any number of things that should be very interesting. It's on 1025 Riverwoods Road, so I would encourage attendance. Then the second item is the Monarchs and Margaritas in celebration of our local endangered, I have a tough time tonight, endangered pollinators. And that will be 7:30 to 9, and I hope I got that right because I tried reading it this time. That will be at Brushwood. There will be refreshments served, etc. There is a nominal fee on that, but I would encourage people to attend. It's talking about the monarchs in particular, but all of our pollinators, which I think we all know are at risk in the country right now. I will say that I took the advice of In Your Backyard and a few other sources. I planted a couple of the butterfly weeds, otherwise known as milkweeds, and I've got at least 3 monarchs in the backyard right now. So that is effective. Okay, any questions? All right, are there any visitors wishing to address the board? Hearing none, I need a motion for approval of bills.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? I know there were some bills that we had duplicates of, et cetera. Those have been identified, and we're holding them. And we have a bill from the people who were supposed to fix the microphone, so definitely we're holding that one.
Yeah, and I just noticed that the report says AT&T 574, if I recall, but there's
different.
1100.
There is one for about.
There are several other mics, so.
That's the only one.
Well,